that there are those throughout history like Bernardino Ochino, Martin Madad, James Campbell, others who are pillars, who are stalwarts, men of men, who were willing to stand for truth when the culture completely shut them out. Bernardino, when he came out about this, and he said, "This is what Scripture says, and I don't see any way around it. This is one option for men." He wasn't even practicing. He just said, "This is one option for men." He and his family got marched out of town in Germany during the winter, and they died in the cold. But the bottom line is, he was righteous, and he did what was righteous, and he will be rewarded for that righteousness precisely because he stood on truth, not on tradition.
But before we leave this topic, I did want to read the quote that our original article we started with talked about, that ends with. So this is the quote that this article ends with, and this is the quote that kind of, I'm not okay with strong emotions. I don't talk about my feelings or anything. This quote kind of broke my heart when I read it. And it's from a woman's perspective again, which again, I don't think is a good idea to be leading with a woman's perspective on these issues, because it keeps you in that same vein of it's still a feminist viewpoint if you come at it from the woman's perspective. But this particular woman's perspective did speak to me on a level. And I want to read this quote. It's the very last, this is what this article ends with. Okay. Most of my single Christian female friends and I anticipate that we will be single and childless for life as a direct result of the lack of single men in the church. We are offered no support by the church to manage our situation. In fact, it is not even acknowledged or recognized as an issue the church needs to address. It is an issue that will affect us for the whole of our lives. No children, no grandchildren. And the constant elevation of family life and marriage, and the assumption by preachers that the audience are married, only enhances the experience of hurt and isolation as a single person. I know of single female friends who have succumbed to the pressure of family and friends by forming relationships with non-Christians. This is an ongoing temptation into a lifestyle of permanent rebellion against God, to which the church offers no support and protection. And I don't want to say necessarily we want to end with this. Yeah, that's the quote right there. Thank you, Pete. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit was that the first command is be fruitful and multiply. And we have cut these women off from the main command. I mean, look, I don't know exactly what this passage means, but Scripture tells us that women will be saved through childbirth, with childbearing.
Wow. Wow.
And we have cut these women off. I don't know if I want to say this or not, but you could almost say that we've cut these women off from salvation. Now, I'm not saying that salvation is spiritual salvation through Jesus, but if women will be saved through childbearing, and we have put in place a system that precludes them from childbearing without leaving the faith, which they are specifically prohibited from doing. They are prohibited from marrying outside the faith in multiple places. And we have instituted and allowed to exist a system that forces them to either ignore the first command, ignore the most obvious way to. You can multiply through evangelism.
Minimally, what we have done is we bar them from the very purpose for their creation and the very purpose they were created for. And that is to be the bearer of the man's seed. Go ahead.
Yeah, we are, all of us, walking reproductive systems. You can look at us as our entire physical bodies are built around this one task of reproducing. My physicality as a man is built around me producing seed and then protecting that seed after I've implanted it in that woman. I have no physical value beyond that ability to implant the seed and protect the seed. And likewise, the woman has no intrinsic physical value other than to accept that seed and nurture the seed. our spiritual value exists separate from our physical value. Our spiritual value is not dependent on our physical value. And so we have cut these women off. And you see this in this comment from this woman at the end of this article, where she sort of, without saying it, she recognizes that she's cut off from one whole half of her value as a physical being. We have a dual nature. We have a spiritual nature and we have a physical nature, and they both coexist. And Scripture tells us that what's bound in heaven is loosed on earth, and what's loosed in heaven is bound on earth. These two worlds interact. You can't separate them from each other. We can't. Obviously, God can, and He will at some point separate them from each other. But right now, these two worlds are so completely interlaced that what happens in one affects what happens in the other. And what doesn't happen in one, you know what I'm trying to say here. And we have severed that link for a whole class of women in the church. And for a whole class of men, by the way, too. And this is the real tragedy of all this system. I have a belief. It's a very strong belief, but very few people share it with me. And that's good, because that lets me feel like I'm smarter than everyone else, and that's what keeps me from getting really, really crazy. So it's good that I'm the only one that believes this. But I don't believe that this world has a set endpoint. I don't believe that God has some future date in mind where He's going to end this world. I think He wants physical creation to last as long as it possibly can. That's why He created an entire universe. He will let us populate the stars if we can do it. But what He will not do is He will not rescue us again. He rescued us in the Garden of Eden. He rescued us with Noah and the ark and the flood. He rescued us at Sinai. He rescued us again when He brought the children, the Judah, back out of captivity. He rescued us again with Christ. He's done rescuing us. The next time we get so bad that He's got to intervene, it's everyone out of the pool. We're going. It's done.
Well, Zach, I want to hit 2 points there. Number one, you and I need to have a really good conversation because we're probably not very far apart on my understanding of eternity as well. We're not going to...
Don't tell me that, because then I'll have to pick some more extreme position to hold.
Yeah, I know. I'll give you some piece so that you have a token specialness. But yes, I'm happy to do that. But honestly, the new heaven and the new earth is a restoration of what's right here, because it tells us that Jerusalem comes down. It doesn't tell us that we're all gone away and we head off to some puffy cloud to play a harp. Right. He created us to be productive. He created us to be procreative.
Yes.
Because we're created in His image, and all of those things existed prior to the fall. But that's a different conversation that'll take us way off on a different tangent. I want to go back to what you were talking about, though, in terms of the woman and her purpose. Another piece of that is that according to Scripture, and I can back this up. I don't want to go into great detail trying to spell it out, but according to Scripture, the assembly is composed of men. It's not composed of women. It's not composed of our children. The assembly is the men, and we are representative heads for the women. And so single women, who represents them in the assembly? Who takes care of them in the assembly? You go back and look at Numbers chapter 1, Numbers chapter 3. I think it's Numbers chapter either 25 or 30, but there are multiple places in the Torah where Moshe clearly makes the case that the assembly is the men. The one caveat. The one caveat is when they come to the table for Passover. Exodus chapter 21, each person, woman and man, comes of their own volition before Yah and represents themselves before Yah when they eat at that table. And that is what Paul is pointing to in Galatians chapter 3, verse 28, when he talks about There's no male, no female, no Jew nor Greek, nor no slave nor free. You look at Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 through maybe 44, 45, right in there. That passage of scripture talks about coming to the Passover table that's representative of the Messiah in each person. There's no Jew, there's no foreigner. The foreigner who's circumcised, the foreigner who believes in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob comes as an equal to an Israelite who is a blood-born Israelite. Male and female come equally. And so at that point, salvation, yes, we all have a direct relationship. But otherwise, everybody deals through the authority structure that God has. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, God, Messiah, man, woman. And for woman to be represented in the assembly, it's multiple places in Scripture. She has to be under the covering, under the headship, under the protection of a man. Period. End of story. Mic drop. That's just the way it works.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us would go so far as to say that the vast majority of Scripture isn't even written for the woman, that the vast majority of it's written for the man.
Right. It's the man's responsibility. This goes back to the headship and patriarchy. It's the man's responsibility to implement that in his home, to teach that in his home. His woman is to teach that to the children, the authority, man, woman, child, etc. But the bottom line is that the man has that authority in his household, which, back to what you were saying, single women need to be in a place of covering because that is where they are in the assembly, or represented in the assembly is through their head and his covenant relationship with the Messiah. And a lot of people, boy, when they hear that, they get major heartburn. Modern Christendom, everybody's their own agent, and that is just not the way Scripture is written. Period. End of story. I don't care. I'll debate it with anybody.
I just wanted to say, back to this this last quote, jumping right off of what Pete just said, back to that quote. My own observations. What makes that quote so heartbreaking and so just, man, it hits me deep in my soul. What makes this so egregious, what makes me so angry with the church is the meekest, most lovely, most wonderful, most God-fearing, God-honoring, lovely young women that are not brazen, they're not brash, they're not in your face, they're not acting like whores. Those women get passed over. Those women get overlooked for the ones that are caking on the makeup and wearing revealing clothing, putting themselves out there, chasing after men. The women that are the most meek and quiet and submissive and lovely are the ones that are headed straight for spinsterhood. Those women that would make lovely, God-honoring, God-fearing wives and mothers are not fulfilling that.
And those are the ones that then are trampled on by the church. They're passed over, left aside, and the church doesn't care, doesn't understand, doesn't recognize what they're doing. That Ezekiel chapter 34 was written to those pastors. The church as a whole will have to give an answer. And I refuse to stand quietly and pretend like I don't see or turn a blind eye and not stand in a very difficult place and say those women have a place. But that means they're going to have to walk countercultural. It means they're going to have to look around them and say, who is a godly man? Who is somebody that would make a great husband? He's proven already. Maybe he's got a wife. Maybe that's a woman that I can get along with. Maybe she'd be a really good friend and be good for me as a person, and I can contribute to that family. And then she needs to pull up her bootstraps, recognize that she has authority, and go say, Would you let me be a part of your family? Can I come and
agency? We want to say she has agency.
She has agency.
Authority.
Okay. Okay. Authority is not the right word. Yes, I agree. But she has the standing to be able to come to a godly man and say, will you take me and your family? Let me be your wife. Let me walk under your authority and be part of your family. And that is the answer the church needs for their single ladies. There's no question. It's also the thing that will force men to start to compete and live up to instead of be lazy and lackadaisical and sorry in their approach to life because they don't have to compete right now. It's good for both the male and the female.